The Crossroads, Chapter 29, the last chapter. They stopped for some food on the way back, hamburgers for Don and Mr. George and pizza for Tomas and Jamie. Pizza! And then continued on onto the ranch. They let Don ride shotgun with Mr. George, while Jamie and Tomas shared the cramped back seat. Mr. George talked endlessly in English about his new grandchild, while Don replied in Spanish, both understanding each other perfectly but refusing to break into the other's language. Stubborn old man. Jamie snapped awake as the truck slowed down, and Mr. George called out in a loud, booming voice, "Well, what have we got here?" Jamie leaned forward, and they turned onto the ranch road, and Mr. George pulled the truck to a complete stop. There stood Angela with Vida, looking a bit hesitant as she held the bridles of two horses. Oh, mercy! Don used a handlebar above the door to ease himself out of the tall truck. The spotted gray gelding let out a neigh from deep in his belly. The reins slipped from Angela's hand, and the horse trotted over to his human friend. Don collapsed against the horse's neck and hugged him tight. Jamie followed behind and gave his cousin, who still held his horse's reins, a big hug. "You're amazing. I wish I'd thought of this." Angela shrugged, though she seemed pretty pleased with herself. "I ditched school and texted Tomas to see when you were on your way. Mel tacked them up." "You ditched school?" "Today, family seemed more important," she smiled. Don detached himself from his horse's neck and gave Angela a hug too. Then, without even using a stirrup, he grabbed the saddle horn and swung his leg around with the grace of a dancer, landing perfectly centered in the saddle. "Now I'm home." He took two deep breaths and turned to Jamie in an old gruff way. "Well, are you just going to stand there, looking at Picasso?" Jamie smiled and mounted the horse with a stirrup. "Baby steps. You can sit behind me," he pointing to Angela. "You know, I've never ridden a horse," she said, half scared, half surprised. Better get started then." Jamie removed his foot from the stirrup and held the reins tight in his right hand. Angela looked back toward the truck just as Mr. George and Tomas drove away down the track. "It's just like riding a train, right?" she said as she grabbed the back of the saddle in Jamie's left hand. She accidentally kicked Picasso, and he swung her leg around, which caused him to sidestep. Still, she scampered on until she was upright, behind Jamie's saddle, holding on to his waist. "Sorry, Picasso," she apologized to the piebald for kicking him. Don nodded, and then his horse went away. Vida trotted ahead of the horses with her nose to the ground, round belly filled to the ribs, and her tail poised high in the air. "Looks like we're going to need to prepare for some new lives coming soon," Donna Vincente said. Tomas said calving season was over. Jamie said it surprised him to know Don was aware of that already. "Angela knows what I'm talking about." Jamie tried to turn and glare at his cousin. Angela laughed and slapped him on the leg. "He's talking about Vida." "I wasn't sure, but her belly is getting bigger." "She's going to have puppies." "How did that happen?" Jamie turned around. Angela sighed. He couldn't even hear the rolling of her eyes. "You really need me to explain it to you." "No, I mean, we found her almost dead, with her insides sticking out. I didn't think she'd be able to have puppies. Obviously, she had a good vet sewing her up." "Yes, she did. I'm glad you saved her. I'm glad you're here with me," Jamie said in a soft voice. It was a joint effort. Angela wrapped her arms tight around his waist and placed his chin on his shoulder. "It's not too bad here, is it?" The horses climbed the hill. With the scattered bushes and open landscape, they could almost see all the way back home to both of them. "It's okay for now," Jamie said. They watched Vida dart this way and that, chasing lizards and following the scent of larger animals. Her one ear cocked and alert, She looked truly happy and full of life. The Epilogue. I'm so nervous. What if I forget my lines? Angela squirmed as she adjusted her habit before her opening scene. You'll be fine, Jamie reassured her. After all, she only had 2 lines, and if she forgot them, someone else would probably chime in. Still, he let her grasp his hand, proud that when he started to feel stage fright, she'd sent one of her friends to get him from the audience. You'll stay in the wings, even if you're not supposed to be here? She asked. I'll watch the whole play from wherever you want me to, he said. She nodded and squeezed his hand tighter. The house lights went on, the orchestra played a few bars, and then the stage lights went on. Unlike the movie, which Angela made him watch 4 times that week, the play started with the nuns at the Abbey. Jamie thought for sure he'd have to shove his cousin on stage, but as soon as the music changed, she strolled out there with all the other nuns, full of more pride and arrogance than any humble nun was supposed to have. And the audience loved it. Her facial expressions, her holier than thou attitude, her stance, all of it worked perfectly, as if she were playing the lead role instead of the Abbey nun number 3. When Angela said her 2 lines, the audience roared in laughter. The scene ended with loud cheers from the audience, and the nuns exited before breaking into silent squeals once off stage. You can go back to Tomas now. Thank you, Angela whispered. That's it? You're done? After all that fuss in the weeks leading up, that had been 2 seconds of fame? Shh, of course not. I'm in loads more scenes. That's the only one where I talk. Now go. He didn't argue. He slipped out of the door that led back to the auditorium and found his place again next to Tomas. How is she? His brother asked. Jamie didn't know what to say. She was Angela, and apparently that meant something different every minute. But at least she proved that no matter how much she changed, when it came down to it, she knew where to find him. He was happy about that. At the front of the stage and off to the side, spotlighted, illuminated Mr. Mike, as he signed the play with elaborate arm gestures and facial expressions. His dance-like interpretation captivated Jamie just as much as the play. Jamie searched the auditorium for Sean, instead spotted Carla, singing along with the members of her family. Freddie seemed very intent on watching the play. Unlike Diego behind him, who made rude comments that kept the woman next to him shushing him every minute. When an usher finally asked them to leave, Jamie gave a silent cheer. 7 children marched on stage, and Jamie immediately recognized Tristan from the bus as the older boy. With his chest held high, he introduced his character with snobbish defiance. A blond boy, sitting a few rows in front of Jamie, turned around and rolled his eyes once he caught Jamie's attention. Jamie rolled his back in agreement and waved at Sean. Now that Jamie knew Tristan wasn't after Angela, he wasn't that bad. The next time Angela came out, Sean turned and pointed to Angela on stage before waving both hands near his face, the sign for cheering. Jamie grinned and applauded back. He was proud of her too. Angela appeared a few minutes in the play, each time wearing a different costume and a different persona as she played a servant, a high society lady, a Nazi, and then her original nun. As the Von Trapp family pretended to climb over cardboard alpine mountains, the rest of the family came on stage to sing the final song, and the lyrics encouraged everyone to keep going until they find their dream. The audience leapt to their feet and cheered. Tomas let out a rancher whistle that could be heard in Guatemala. Jamie had to admit that even though he hadn't seen the movie too many times that week, they did get a great job with the play. Flowers in hand, they strolled to the front of the stage to wait for Angela. On the way, Tomas leaned over the orchestra pit with a small bouquet of pink, yellow, and white carnations and handed them to the lady playing the alpenhorn. It's a good thing I got your autograph before you hit the big time. Mrs. McAllister laughed. Maybe by next fall, Jamie would be able to say her name right. On the other hand, he liked the way he said it just fine. In music, it's all about timing. Today I'm famous. Tomorrow I'm back to grading. So you better eat while you can, Tomas said wisely. Mies cringed. Are you cooking tonight again? Tomas looked offended. And make the same mistake twice? No way. Actually, Donna Chichi is making celebratory dinner for Angela, and she knows how to use a stove. Well, there'll be enough. Jamie and Tomas laughed. Since Don's return, Donna Chichi had made a single meal that hadn't been large enough to feed all of New Mexico. You won't starve, Jamie reassured her. He noticed Angela come out from backstage and grabbed the bouquet of pink roses from Tomas's hand. He swept her up in a big hug, almost lifting her off her feet. You were great. Definitely the best Abby Nun #3. It worked well with the character. Angela narrowed her eyes at Jamie. She took a big whiff of her roses and sniffed at the scent. She motioned toward Tomas, still teasing and laughing with Mies. So he has asked her out yet? Just to join us at the ranch for dinner. Donna Chichi cooks so much. He's just being nice. Angela shook her head and rolled her eyes. You're so clueless. Just keep in mind, we might need a bigger house. Jamie shrugged. The trailer was just a container. It wasn't what made a home. That's not a bad thing, is it? She draped an arm over Jamie, giving him half a squeeze, half a pinch. Not as long as our family's there. The author's note. When I started preschool, I didn't speak English, and the only other non-English speakers were twins from India. As the daughter of Cuban refugees, I speak Spanish as my first language, although I learned English quickly. There were moments of frustration and misunderstanding. Like Jamie, I struggled to make the TH sound in words like three and thank you. To this day, I sometimes sanguish instead of sandwich. My family moved several times when I was a child. When I started one new school, I used every way I knew to ask to use the bathroom, and I didn't understand what the teacher meant when she kept insisting that I sign out first. At another school, I received a hate letter for no other reason than being different. Jamie adapted much better to his new environment than I did, but having a teacher who checked up on him and a friend on the bus, Jamie had the support I never had. I can only wish every child entering a new school system could have those friendships. All children in the United States and Canada, regardless of their immigration status, are legally entitled to education. New Mexico is an English-Spanish bilingual state with the highest percentage, 29% of Spanish speakers per capita in the United States. Yet unfortunately, it ranks as one of the lowest in quality of public education. Immigration policies in the United States seem to be changing daily, but these changes are often not for the better. A person in Guatemala filing for legal status in the United States might have to wait more than 10 years for papers to be processed. That's too long for a person whose life is in danger or whose children are starving. Opportunities. At the moment I'm writing this, children like Jamie and Angela can apply for special immigrant juvenile visa. One of the best ways for people to show their support for immigration is to read and be aware of what's happening. If there are immigrants in your community, make them feel welcome and get to know them as people, not just immigrants. There are programs for adults to become foster parents, while the legal system determines whether a child can stay in the United States or not, an alternative to remaining in a detention center. Together as community, immigration awareness can be raised. We are a nation of immigrants. If it weren't for immigrants, most of us wouldn't be here. No matter how things change for the worse, we must keep our hope. Hope that there is a way. Hope that things will get better. When we give up on hope, we give up on life.